Thank you all so much for coming. And please introduce to you Erin Nugent, who's our speaker this morning for John Paul II and his devotion to Our Lady. As Father talked about at Mass, and I'm sure she's going to integrate some theology of the body, as Father mentioned. Erin is an associate with Theology of the Body Cleveland, which is a nonprofit, pretty new in the diocese, to kind of spread John Paul's message and his wisdom and his teachings of theology of the body. She's originally from Texas, and she was a missionary with an organization called the Culture Project, which is devoted to teaching youth and young adults and even parents about virtue and the dignity of the human person and the dignity of our bodies and our sexuality. So she was doing that for a year in the Diocese of Pittsburgh, and now she's an associate as of like last July, I think, right?
Yep.
Or so.
Last June, July.
Yeah, with the associate and the Diocese of Cleveland. So yeah, pleased to welcome her. She can lead us in a prayer. But again, let's give her a round of applause.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Like Brad said, my name is Erin, and I'm really excited for today. As he mentioned, I get to go around the diocese and teach theology of the body, which we'll get to talk about a little bit today about what that is and John Paul II's work. But it's not as often that I get to spend 30 to 45 minutes just talking about John Paul II. So I'm really excited. I've got some really good stories and pictures for you guys today. But before we dive in, let's just go ahead and start in a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, I just thank you for the gift of this morning, this time to just study and learn about one of your just wonderful saints who has blessed so many people, especially in this century, and who certainly has been a spiritual father to me. Lord, I just ask that you would give me the grace to speak well of him, that he would be present among us and you would be present among us. And Mary, you love John Paul II so much, and so we entrust this time to you, praying, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now, and at the hour of our death. Amen. Awesome. Great. So as Brad mentioned, I'm originally from the great state of Texas. Yeehaw. Happy to be here in Cleveland. The reason I came up here, it's such a crazy and wild story, and it's only been about 2 years since it happened. But I was born in a town, College Station, where Texas A&M is. I don't know if anyone knows that college, but okay, great. Big football school. So grew up right there, ended up going to college in my hometown. And the faith was always something that we did on Sunday, but never something really serious for me as the adolescent. Until I got into high school. And when I was in high school, I'm 16 years old. You think back to when you were 16 years old, you can kind of imagine what it was like, right? I was dating for the first time. I was like seeking independence. And I just remember having just a desire to really learn and to understand what is love. Probably wouldn't have conceptualized it like that, but I really wanted to know, like, how do you love well? How do relationships last? How do marriages last? What do I have to do? And I was also asking that really infamous question that I'm sure all young people ask, which is, how far is too far? Classic. But I remember being 16 and going on Amazon and ordering a book, because I wanted to answer some of my theological questions about sexual morality, but I didn't want to ask my mom. So I went on Amazon and ordered a book. Yeah, classic. So I knew John Paul II. I'd heard of him before, and I'll share a little bit about that, but I knew he wrote something called Theology of the Body. So I get on Amazon, and the book was about $40. And I'm 16, and I'm like, I don't have $40 to spare, so I'm not buying that one. So instead, I looked at this little book called Love and Responsibility. Has anyone ever heard of Love and Responsibility? No? Okay. So this is a book that Cardinal Wojtyła, John Paul II, wrote before he became Pope. And it is this dense, philosophical, super tough book So I just ordered this, like $15 on Amazon. I'm like, oh, this will be great. This will answer my questions. So I get the book in the mail and I literally get 7 pages in. So I'll take a picture to show you guys. It says 31 right there, but it was one of those books that like starts on page 25. You know what I mean? So I get 7 pages into this book before I'm like, this is too hard. All right. So I start flipping through, kind of doing some Google searches to kind of understand what is he trying to say here. And it was in Love and Responsibility that I encountered for the first time, just this idea of giving of self, what it means to love, how we as men and women are called to love by giving of ourselves. In Love and Responsibility, I got this first taste of just how beautiful human love is meant to be, and just the great dignity with which John Paul II in particular looked at the human person. So again, I'm 16, I could not comprehend any of that, right, really, but I do remember this just incredibly profound moment where I said, Lord, whatever that is, that's what I want. I don't want a love that's mediocre. I don't want a marriage that's mediocre. If I'm going to do this, I want excellence. And that was such a grace for my little 16-year-old heart as I go into college, right, and experience the culture in a more profound way. So that was my first moment with, one of my first moments with John Paul II. I had one earlier, it wasn't really a moment, but you probably have heard about how the saints you don't pick a confirmation saint, they pick you, right? Well, this is particularly true for me because my confirmation saint is actually John Paul II. When I was a freshman in high school, I didn't know anything about him, but I chose him quite literally because he was a male and I thought that would annoy my youth minister. That's it. That's how deep that was. So you can say that I was laughing then, but he's certainly laughing now, right? Because 5-10 years later, my whole job is to teach his message. And so it's a beautiful gift. This image right here, I took this my senior year of college. My spiritual director, we were just talking about family and saints who really had a huge impact on me. And she just encouraged me to go take a family picture. So here I am with my family picture of Mother Teresa and John Paul II. John Paul II is absolutely, I call him grandpa. Like he's just such a grandpa to me. And his life and his witness and his teachings, all of it has been so beautiful, such rich gifts to me. And I hope that today we'll get to dive into a little bit about who this man is, why he's had such an impact on my generation, but also the entire church, really. He was canonized not too long ago. Actually, he was canonized the year before I was confirmed in 2013. So he was also new. So I was like, not a lot of people have him. That's another reason I picked him. So anyway, very deep. But he's already, I'm so sure he's going to be a doctor of the church one day because his teachings, in addition to his just active life, is just so beautiful and so rich. So this great man that we know as Pope St. John Paul II really started from humble, simple beginnings. He was born on May 18th in 1920 to Amelia and Carol Wojtyła in Wadowice, Poland. So that's about 30 miles outside of Krakow. So Wadowice. And there's a story he would tell about the day of his birth. His mother, Amelia, was going into labor in their small apartment while crowds of people were flocking to the church because it was the feast of the presentation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so Amelia, as she's giving birth in labor, asked her midwife to open the window so that she could hear the bells and the singing of hymns to the Blessed Virgin Mary. So we're going to get to talk about his life a little bit, but we're also going to get to share about particularly his devotion to the Blessed Mother and just how that really shaped his formation and his pontificate. So his early life, you can see him right here. They confirmed much, much earlier, but that's him at his early confirmation. And this is him with his Amelia and Carol and him as a little child. So very, very cute. His childhood was very happy. His family was just very faithful and very beautiful, and family life was very important to them. He had an older sister who passed away before he was born, but he had an older brother, Edmund, who was 14 years older than him, but they were a very close-knit family. Unfortunately, at the age of 8, Amelia passed away, and so he lost his mother very early in life at the age of 8. 4 years later, his brother, who was a doctor, also passed away after catching an illness from one of his patients. So within 4 years, by the age of 12, he had already lost an older sister, a older brother, and his mother. John Paul II, when talking about his early life and some of the sufferings he experienced, he shared that his father, in a particular way, through those sufferings, really turned to prayer. He says that his father discovered new spiritual depths in his experience of suffering. He recounts that when Edmund died, his older brother, Carroll Sr. wept over his grave and said, "Thy will be done, thy will be done, thy will be done." Those aren't the words of a man who's not fighting, not struggling with the suffering, but really opening his pain up to the Lord. And Pope John Paul II said that witness of his father really taught him what prayer can be like, what prayer can be like. And so hopefully we'll get to see just the beautiful mystical prayer that Pope St. John Paul II lived out. And I'm going to call him JP2 as well. So if I say JP2, that's what I'm saying. But his name's kind of long, so hopefully he'll forgive me. So after Edmund died, the small family, Carroll Sr. and Carroll Jr., moved to Krakow to stay with some family members, some of his mother's aunts. And it was there that John Paul II ended up going to college to study Polish language and culture. And it was there that he discovered a great love for theater. So I'm not sure if you know this, but John Paul II was a wonderful actor and a prolific writer, not just of theology, but also poetry. He wrote a few plays that are actually really quite good. They're very deep and very metaphysical, so you got to put on your philosophical brain, but they are really beautiful. And I'll come back to this picture, but before we get there. So at the age of 19, a significant event happened in that Nazi Germany invaded Poland, and Carol Wojtyia's whole life really changed. He recounts stories of really witnessing the bombing of Germany on Krakow and the ways that so many lives were lost. During that time, the Nazis would arrest a lot of the professors at his college, and so it became really difficult for him to continue with school. He was able to do classes here and there, but he was ultimately sent to go work at a quarry. So this right here is his working during the war, during the Nazi occupation. So while he's experiencing the real tyranny of the Nazis, he begins to turn to prayer in the face of that suffering, just like his own father did. And his spiritual life really began to bloom when he met a man named Jan Tyranowski. Okay, I'm not saying that right, he was Polish, but Jan Tyranowski. This man was a single youth minister. He was an unmarried tailor, but he was known in Poland for being just a man of exceptional spiritual life. He had this deep, deep life of prayer that really fed his ministry. He would often invite young people into his house and lead them in the rosary and lead them in a time of spiritual formation. Meeting in small groups, particularly to witness to the faith, was very much discouraged and was very dangerous during the Nazi occupation. But he did it, and eventually Carol Wojtyła joined as well. And so in that encounter, he met another man of very deep prayer, who ultimately was a huge source of encouragement and formation for the young Carol Wojtyła. Pope John Paul II, he was also a really bold young man. So he decided, with the real danger of living life, under the Nazi regime, he decided to try and resist in small ways. And so he had a great love of Polish culture and language, the very things that Germany and later communist Russia would try and suppress. And so in resistance to that, he created a small underground organization known as the Rhapsodic Theater. So this will be a group of individuals who would come together to share Polish culture, poetry, theater, and to really perform some of the heritage as a way of preserving it. Meeting in a small group with the intention of preserving culture was very much not allowed by the Nazis. And so meeting together was truly a great risk of death. And John Paul II has shared lots of stories of just the danger he was in. And in fact, how many close scrapes with death he truly had. Ultimately, the war helped him to discern priesthood. A year after the Nazis entered Germany or entered Poland, Karol II also lost his father. So at the age of 20, he had effectively lost all the closest people to him. He ended up moving in with some family friends. But in that experience of being alone, right, in the Nazi-occupied country that he loved so much, really struggling with the deaths of so many people around him, it was through prayer that JP2 found the solace and found a deeper intimacy with the Lord. And it was in that time of prayer that he ultimately discovered that the Lord was, in fact, calling him into priesthood. So during the war, while it's still going on, John Paul II decides to enter into the seminary as a secret seminarian. The seminary was very much not allowed, so it was shut down. And so priests would form seminarians in secret in the living rooms and rectories at night. And so they'd have to sneak around. It was in this one particular chapel where John Paul II received a lot of his formation. And again, it was such a dangerous time. There were so many things that JP2 did that were so dangerous. One of his fellow seminarians, who was supposed to be, they were both supposed to be at a chapel to receive formation. When he gets there, his seminarian friend isn't there. And he finds out later that the seminarian individual, his name was Jerzy, was actually arrested by the police, sent to Auschwitz, and effectively killed. Why? Because he was a seminarian. And yet John Paul II, through so many close encounters with death, ultimately we know wasn't killed. Really, we can just see the grace of the Lord in that. So after a couple of years studying and working, John Paul II was ordained as a priest on November 1st in 1946, right after the Nazi regime left Poland only for communist Russia to restore their regime in the country. So as we can see, 20 years of life, he's ordained at the age of 26, so much profound suffering in his personal life and in his world, in his culture. He witnessed so much death so early on. And that bravery, the fortitude he experienced and developed as a result of that suffering really shaped his. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the most important themes of his priesthood, some of the things he's known for. If you've seen pictures of John Paul II before he was Pope, I'm sure you've seen him in the forest, right? He loved nature. He loved the mountains and the forests and the hills of Poland. And he spends so much time bringing young people up into the mountains to experience it. In Polish, there's a word that he would use to describe these adventures. He would say środowisko, which means natural home, environment. John Paul II believed that by bringing young people up into the środowisko, they would have an opportunity to connect with the Lord, to encounter his goodness and his beauty in the created world. Because the communist government really discriminated against priests and really restricted their ability to serve the church, they wouldn't call him Father Karol. They would call him wujek, which is Polish for uncle. So he became an uncle to a lot of young people, especially in the early years of his priesthood. And I just love that thought that, this man who's lost all of his family doesn't turn in on himself, doesn't become bitter, but instead opens his heart radically as a priest and finds a real spiritual family and young people throughout Poland. Really, there are a lot of photos of him hiking in the forest. So you can see that he was a looker here, right? I don't know what he's doing here or here, but love it. Shaving in the wilderness. So he's just such a down-to-earth man, right? These pictures exist not only because he's a more modern saint, but because he was just so free to be himself, right? He was so down to earth. These opportunities to go into the mountains, as you can see here with a bunch of young people, were really an opportunity for him to give a lot of pastoral care. In Love and Responsibility, which I can officially say I have read now as of like 2 weeks ago, so I can feel pretty proud of myself for that one. He begins the book by saying, what does a celibate man have to say about love and marriage and sexuality? Well, what I've learned from my pastoral care, from spending hours with young people, with married couples, learning about their hearts, learning about the struggles of living out sexuality. So he knew so much about the human heart. He truly studied the human heart. And it was those insights in the mountains of Poland and walking with people as a priest that he really set the formation that would lead to wonderful, rich books like Love and Responsibility and ultimately the Theology of the Body. So another thing I just want to point out about him being in the wilderness so much is that he truly developed a sacramental vision. JP2 was able to see in everything in the created world a sign leading us to God. He was able to see not just trees and trees, not just mountains and mountains, but he was able to see beyond and through them into the beauty and goodness of God. And we've all probably had those encounters with the natural world, whether it be the ocean. In Texas right now, all the wildflowers are blooming, so I'm sad to miss it, but just a carpet of bluebonnets, right? Just speaks to me of the beauty of God. And in the mountains, it provided him an opportunity to really reflect on the goodness of creation. That sacramental vision was going to form and really shape what is known as theology of the body. So this is the great text that I get to read. It's a 600-page book, so feel free to read that one if you want. So honestly, I think it's a little bit easier than Love and Responsibility, though much longer. In this book, what John Paul II does is talk about the goodness of the body. It's exactly what it sounds like. The study of how God reveals himself through the human body. So when I teach middle schoolers, which I have the incredible pleasure to do, and I talk to them about theology of the body, I always say TOB is a study of how the body reveals God, how in our masculinity and in our femininity, not just a spiritual, emotional reality, but really a physical one, the way that men's bodies are made and women's bodies are made, we can see that we are made for love. Because the male body doesn't make sense on its own. It only makes sense in reference to a female body. And if you look at the female body, it only makes sense in reference to the male body. And so that complementarity that is the basis of marriage and sexual union actually is something so beautiful that tells us about what we're made for. We're made for heaven. We're made for union with God. And so JP2 was able to take that sacramental vision that he developed up in the mountains of Poland and really apply it to the human body. Our culture really has lost sight of the goodness and the prophetic nature of the human body, right? You look at our culture today, the body isn't a sign of identity, right? The body is something disposable. It doesn't tell you if you're male or female. But we as Catholics know that, yes, it does. It very much tells us about who we are and what we're made for. Our bodies are good, and they're meant to point us to who God is and what we're made for. John Paul II also, as I've already mentioned, was not just a hiker, not just a theologian, not just a philosopher, but he was a poet. He was a man who loved theater. And I brought with me my first book of his poetry. So if you're interested in reading some of John Paul II's poetry, it's called The Place Within. So it's translated from Polish, but it's still very, very good. I honestly credit that book with teaching me how to pray. I say that kind of laughingly because I shared with a priest that I love this book, and he was like, nah, too abstract for me. So maybe it'll be too abstract for you. But for me, just the beauty of the way he speaks about things, he speaks about prayer, really taught me just how deep we can go with the Lord. So he is a man, he's a very popular priest in the area. And eventually he rises at the young age of 38 to become a bishop. And soon after that, to become a cardinal. There's a funny story that Jason Everett shares about John Paul II. The communist government in Poland really sought to control the Catholic Church in Poland. And so the way they tried to do that was really control who is going to be bishop, who is going to be cardinal, who was allowed to do certain things. And one communist official really thought that John Paul II, because of his youth and because of his interest in the arts, was going to be particularly easy to control. And so the communist government really was the one who ushered John Paul II from being a priest to a bishop to a cardinal. So thank you, communist government, right? Appreciate that. That big mistake on their end that they made really led to so much goodness. And so John Paul II, as he's a bishop and cardinal, had a huge role in the small resistance of the Catholic Church towards communist government. So very quickly after he's made a cardinal, they begin to be like, okay, hold on a second, maybe we made a mistake. Because this man did everything he could to push back in small ways against the ways that the Polish government was seeking to suppress the spread and the activity of the faith. But ultimately, we all know that his time as cardinal did not last forever, right? And so he eventually was elected pope. Maybe you don't know, his name is John Paul II, right? John Paul the Great, as we call him, but his predecessor was John Paul I. So John Paul I was elected and had a very short pontificate. He was only pope for 33 days before dying. And as a way of honoring his predecessor, John Paul II chose the name John Paul II. So he was elected pope in October of 1978. Right here is on the day of his election. He is the first non-Italian pope in 455 years. So after a very long time, he has his first homily was people instantly fell in love with him because this man was just charismatic. He was young and strong and just so good. And in his first homily, he has a very popular line that you may have heard before. He says, "Be not afraid, open wide the doors to Christ." That's an incredible motto for what his pontificate was to do, because he was to give himself over the next 27 years so radically, so radically. In this image, you can see it's when he's elected pope, but right here, he was traveling to the Kenyan church in Nairobi, Kenya, and he did such a wonderful job of traveling to so many different countries and cultures. He was the first pope to really travel extensively. And there's stories of him traveling and getting very little sleep just to be with people, to proclaim to them that God is here for us, right? That God is present in not just one culture, but all cultures, and that the Catholic Church truly is universal. Whenever he traveled to a new country and he got off the plane, he would kiss the ground, and just in a sign of reverence for the culture and that place. And then I just thought this was so funny. You know, like you can imagine that kid in 20 years being like, I might have taken a better picture with John Paul II, but I think he's taken it pretty well there. I love it. So during his pontificate, John Paul II had a really impressive evangelization. He was able to really connect with all kinds of people, atheists, people in the culture, politicians. John Paul II met with them all and really had an impact on all of them. He was just someone who was so authentic, so loving, that his sharing of the gospel was so effective. So I included some pictures of what I think are cool JP2. So you'll see him meeting with Bono of U2 up in the left corner. So trying on his glasses. I love that picture. You can see here, he's a really cool guy with the sunglasses, and I love this picture of the puppy. This is how I start my presentations with middle schoolers, because they see a puppy and they're like, I'm like, I know, he's cool. So John Paul II was particularly known for having a really profound impact on young people, not just young people of the 80s and 90s, but even me, right? Being 24 and loving him so much, he still is, had such an impact. Part of it is because he was just, like I've already said, so down to earth. There's this funny story of him. When he was in the Vatican, living in his quarters, his dietitian, his team decided that he needed to try and lose a little bit of weight and eat a little bit healthier. He was known for enjoying dessert, so very human. And particularly, he would love cookies. And whenever he wanted a cookie, he would just start making a circle on the table, like this, for those you can't see, to kind of signify that he was ready for his cookie. And so his team tells him, all right, sir, we don't think you should, we're not going to give you any dessert today to try and cut back, help your health, because as he's getting older, his health started to decline. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay. And so after dinner, he's meeting with all these officials, and he just starts to do his little cookie thing. And he doesn't stop, and he just keeps going. And eventually they give him this cookie. So, I love it. I love a good man who loves a cookie. Yeah, I got to try that, right? So John Paul II, his theology of the body in particular had an influence on young people. So As Father mentioned, if you were at Mass, John Paul II, one of the first things he does when he becomes Pope is he begins to give these Wednesday audiences. So every Wednesday, he'd go up in St. Peter's Square and begin to teach. And this is pretty normal. Every Pope does this. Pope Francis has some Wednesday audiences going right now. But people began to listen to what John Paul was saying and notice that this was something different. This was something that no Pope had really specifically talked and spoken into so publicly. Because what he was doing was sharing about human sexuality, the sacrament of marriage, what it means to be human with sexual desire, and how that not only relates to our behavior and how we live, but how that relates to the Lord. So when I was in college and I, start to learn a little bit more about John Paul II beyond just a name and 7 pages of love and responsibility, I began to hear about this thing of theology of the body. Now, theology of the body is so much more than sexual ethics, right? Saving sex for marriage, pornography, it speaks into all of these things that our culture really needs to hear the good news about. But more than that, it's a Catholic anthropology. It tells us about what it means to be human. And so in the first 60% of theology of the body, what you're going to hear is John Paul II just speaking so beautifully about scripture, about how from the very beginning, we can see that we were made for relationship. Myself, but also so many people my age and the students I speak with, we are in a very lonely time, just a very lonely culture. And young people in particular are struggling with this. And so my, 20-year-old ears who is hearing that actually we're made for love, we're made for relationship, and that the Catholic Church is not down on sexuality, it's not down on sex, but actually holds it up as something as so beautiful and so reverent, and that's meant to just lead us to the absolute depths, just moved my heart. And so many young people also have received this message of theology of the body and been impacted by its beauty. There's something just so relatable about it. He just spoke it in a language that really connected with the hearts of my generation, I think, in particular. And so it's a great gift for me to get to share it. Last thing I'll say about John Paul II, or not necessarily, but before we transition a little bit, is to say that he was a man of deep, deep prayer. There are stories after stories after stories of him just being found at early in the morning, just deep in prayer, totally lost in the sacrament. People would hear him groaning with the sounds of the Holy Spirit, just so intoxicated with the Lord. His prayer was the foundation of his ministry. He would never go travel, go speak if he didn't have time to pray. Not just the office, but to spend time in personal contemplation with the Lord. And he prayed so much that his team, his travel team, really began to be a little bit annoyed with the damage he would do to their schedule, right? What do I mean? So he was visiting Baltimore one time, and I can't remember his name, but it was a priest who is in charge of bringing him to different places in Baltimore. And so he's visiting one place where he'll be staying for a little bit, but he's supposed to be here briefly and then go give a talk. And so while the priest is there, he notices that there's a chapel in this building, and he says, "Okay, close that door and don't tell Father, don't tell Pope that there's a chapel. Okay, don't tell him, because if we do, he's gonna delay us and it'll be a whole mess." So John Paul II gets there, he gets inside and he's walking, and he walks by this chapel, and it's like he knows. And he looks at the priest who's in charge of his schedule and goes, and he opens the door to the chapel, goes in and spends 2 hours in prayer, doing considerable damage to their speaking schedule. But for John Paul II, there was nothing better he could be doing. Everything was a prayer for him. And more than speaking, he could be praying for the people of Baltimore. And so that just is a witness to me as a young woman who spends a lot of time working and speaking. John Paul II and that witness tells me that what I can do that's more important than this even would be to pray. Right? And that's such a powerful witness and a real challenge to me in particular. So many of you may be familiar with an event that happened in May 13th, the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima in 1981. While he was about to give his Wednesday audience of the Theology of the Body, John Paul II is actually shot while riding in the Pope Mobile by a Turkish gunman named Ali Agca. So 2 years prior, Ali had escaped from prison and had left a note saying, "I'm going to kill the Pope if he does not cancel his visit to Turkey," in one of his extensive travel plans. The Pope did go to Turkey and visited the country. And so 2 years later, remembering his promise, Ali gets into the Vatican and shoots John Paul II. It fractured his hands, but also passed through his chest and out his sacrum, passing just millimeters away from his aorta. There's so many just incredible stories about this assassination attempt and the fact that John Paul II really shouldn't have survived. There's a story about the surgeon, the Pope's personal surgeon, who is one of the most excellent surgeons in the world and really specialized in this kind of trauma. This day, May 13th, he wasn't supposed to go to work. It was his day off. And that day, the surgeon just felt this prompting to go to work. He didn't know why, he didn't understand, but he decided to just pack up and go to work. And while he's pulling into the parking lot, he gets the phone call that John Paul II has been shot and is being brought into the hospital. And so he operates on him and ultimately ends up saving his life. Now, this day, May 13th, the feast of Our Lady of Fatima, John Paul II knew that it was no coincidence that this had happened and that his life had been saved on this day. Beginning with his mother and her witness, he knew and just had a very special relationship with Mary. He read True Devotion to Mary by St. Louis de Montfort when he was a seminarian, and it really shaped his relationship with Mary. And he has a beautiful poem in here, In the Place Within, talking about his mother. And you can just see the reverence and the love he had for her. And so losing her, in one sense, was a real trauma and a tragedy to him. But he really gained in Mary a new mother, a spiritual mother that had a huge impact on his pontificate. So after this event, John Paul II, recognizing what Our Lady of Fatima did to him, truly honors her and ended up placing the bullet with which he was shot into the crown of Our Lady of Fatima. So you can see that crown. And here you see Pope John Paul II who is that but the man who tried to kill him. So he visited Ali in prison multiple times, and they ended up visiting, having a relationship and speaking. And Ali, when he met John Paul II, the first thing he asked him was, "How are you alive? I am a trained assassin and I shot you from point blank. How are you alive?" And so John Paul II got to share with him just the power of Our Lady of Fatima and everything she did for him. So this is a good segue for us to talk a little bit about his real beautiful devotion to Mary. So this is a funny picture I found on my phone while I was prepping. It's me in South Texas on a mission trip, but I stumbled upon JP2 and Our Lady of Guadalupe, and I was like, another family photo, so I'll take it right here. But John Paul II loved Mary. His papal motto was Totus Tuus, which means totally thine, and it's particularly a part of a prayer to Mary from St. Louis de Montfort. Mary, I am totally yours. The love and his faithfulness of his own mother really was what's the word? Catalyst, thank you. I was about to say enzyme. Sorry. The catalyst that led to a lot of his teachings on Mary. He said of the rosary that it's his daily meeting, which neither him nor the Virgin Mary neglect. So daily they would pray the rosary together. And then people would describe him as just super intensely in prayer, really contemplatively praying the rosary. People would hear him saying, "Oh, Maria, Madonna," just so intensely. You get this sense that not only is he having a real mystical experience, but there's this real human element here. That Mary to him wasn't just this beautiful woman, this beautiful idol, but truly was a mother, right? Truly had a relationship as one speaks to their own mother. Her universal motherhood was really proclaimed by him in the encyclical Redemptoris Mater, which is Mother of the Redeemer, when he shares a lot of beautiful Mariology or theology on the Mother of God. And so 3 main points that this encyclical makes that teaches us about what John Paul II has to say about Mary. The first is Mary in the mystery of Christ, right? All of us know that the way that God chose to become incarnate, the way that God became man, wasn't just showing up one day as a 33-year-old man. No, he chose to be a few millimeters big in the womb of his mother, Mary. That God chose to not be able to breathe on his own, but instead to rely on a mother. That God chose to be so little in the womb of a human girl, right? That Mary truly brought Christ into the world in a theological way, brings Christ into all of our hearts, right? So we can turn to Mary not only as a witness, but as an opportunity for us to go deeper in relationship with Christ. John Paul II said that at first he was nervous about a relationship with Mary, that it might detract from his relationship with Christ. But through St. Louis de Montfort, he quickly learned that having a relationship with Mary never detracts from the Lord. It always just leads us deeper, because the mother is totally convicted by the beauty and the goodness of the Son. The mother always leads us to the Son. John Paul II also said that the mother is at the center of the pilgrim church. What this means is we here right now are the church militant, right? We are the ones praying and fighting and evangelizing and trying to teach this broken world about the truth of the gospel. And at the center of this mystery of this church is our mother, Mary. Mary was present in the upper room when the Holy Spirit descended upon the apostles and gave them the ability, to preach and to proclaim the person of Jesus Christ. Mary was there. So Mary truly is our model, our guide, our witness, our means of evangelizing. I've always thought it was so beautiful that Mary's apparitions are all over the world, and I just love that, because that's her being an incredible evangelizer. She doesn't just come to Europe. She doesn't just come to the United States. She's in Africa. She's in Asia. She's all over the place, because she wants the entire world to know who Jesus is, right? She's this powerful evangelizer. And in our own families and our own ministries, by entrusting ourselves to her, right, we can entrust the lives and the salvation of the people in our family as well. The third part is, of course, maternal mediation, this idea that Mary truly plays an intercessory role in our lives, that she was given to John at the foot of the cross in the Gospel of John, and thus she's given to every single one of us as a mother, as a safe place, and as just a good friend. John Paul II was very convicted that had faith in the victory of the church and that it would come through Mary. Why? Because Jesus came through Mary. And so his means of bringing salvation into the world was through his mother. And so now in modern day, his means of bringing light and hope into this world will be him through his mother. In researching for this talk, I've known that the luminous mysteries were created by John Paul II, but I didn't realize that he actually gave them in 2002. So I was alive in 2002. I was 2 years old, but I was there. And so, yeah, he even gave us the gift of the luminous mysteries. It's just a way of entering even deeper into contemplation with the Lord and with our mother. How am I doing? Okay, gotta finish up soon. So just some more pictures of you of him praying before Madonna of Poland and with the rosary, and before some of the a place that had significance in World War II. So the last two things I want to leave you with is just this prayer that's given to John Paul II. This is his Totus Tuus prayer. And if we read through this, we can just hear how intense he is about giving himself to Mary. He wants everything. Speak in me and through me. Think your thoughts in me. Love through my heart. Everything I give to you. Totus Tuus, totally thine. John Paul II entrusted everything to Mary, and in turn, Mary gave him everything. She gave him her son. And I think that the reason his pontificate was so fruitful was because he entrusted himself totally to Mary. So, as we enter into the Easter season, into Holy Week, there's some things we can do to not just pray specifically with John Paul II, but also with our Mother Mary. I've recently been doing a Marian consecration by someone named Father Boniface Hicks. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's really wonderful. So if you're looking for a new Marian consecration, Fruit of Her Womb is what it's called. But in it, he has this litany called Litany of Jesus and the Womb of Mary. just so powerful, just one of those beautiful litanies. And you can actually find it on Google. So if you Google that, you can find it. So, but I would encourage you to pray with it because it's just a beautiful reminder that God truly became so humble, so small, so little. This infinite, incredible God chose to be so tiny in the womb of Mary. And he invites us to entrust all of our hopes, our fears, our entire lives, everything that we are into the womb of Mary with John Paul II, with Jesus. We can also enter into Holy Week specifically through her eyes to ask what was it like for her on Holy Thursday? What was Good Friday like for her? What was Holy Saturday like for her? And then just let her lead us in prayer, deeper contemplation of just the mystery of the Triduum. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't say, of course, I know there are people here, I'm sure, who are much more faithful in their rosary than me, but praying the rosary specifically as a way of entering in through Mary's eyes to view each mystery through her eyes. One of the most beautiful things I've heard is that when we hold the rosary, we just essentially hold Mary's hand. And so a relationship with Mary is really an invitation to be little kids again, to be little kids with a mother who takes care of us, who loves us, who wants to give us cookies. So you can eat a cookie while you're praying the rosary, just an idea. But yeah, so with that, I'd love to just close this in prayer and just, if we want to pray this together at the end, I think that'd be beautiful. So if you guys will join me in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Jesus, we praise you and we thank you. We thank you for your mother whom you've given to us. You desire just to entrust your mother to us and entrust us to her. You've given us so much love and so many opportunities to know you, Lord. And I just pray that as we enter into the Triduum, into Holy Week, we would just be drawn into deeper relationship with you through your mother. Mary, you are good, you are beautiful, you are loving, you are our mother. And I pray that you would teach us how to be little kids again with you, that we could entrust all of our fears, all of our hopes, all of our being into your womb. And so we say this prayer of John Paul II in honor of you. Immaculate Mary, be my mother, live in me, act in me, speak in me, and through me. Take your thoughts in my mind, love through my heart. Give me the dispositions and feelings. Teach, lead, and guide me, Jesus. Correct, enlighten, and set my thoughts and behavior. Possess my soul. Take over my entire personality and life. Replace it with yourself. Incline me to constant adoration. Pray in me and through me. Let me be lived in you and you especially all things. Amen. Father, Son, and Spirit. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Anybody have any questions for Erin about anything of JP2's life, about his Mariology? Any questions? About her work with Culture Project or work with Theology by Ecclesiastes, anything?
You give us such hope for the young.
Thank you.
Wow. Get to speak to the, the middle grades, the high schoolers. Oh, boy, do they need somebody like you to lead them.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Speak to a lot of high schoolers.
Right now we do a lot of middle school, but I do occasionally speak with high schoolers. Our offices are at St. Basil the Great, so I have some relationships with those live teen high schoolers, but there's a few teachers who are thinking about inviting us in. A lot of high school theology teachers really are stellar, and so they are sharing a lot of this, but we're there to meet any gap that any school or in the Diocese of Cleveland has. So if you know a school or you're in a school and you want to invite us in, we'd love to come. We also do PSR in different parishes. So yeah.
The organization, how large is the organization?
So it's 2 people right now. Yeah. So my boss, Jen Ricard, she's from Hudson, Ohio. About 5 years ago, she incorporated and founded this nonprofit. And last year they made their first hire, which is me. And we're actually going to hire again. So if you know any young men in particular who I think would love to teach TOB, send them our way. But yeah, so there's two of us and we go all over the place. So I was in Parma last week. I was in Chardon the week before, Solon, all over the place. So, yeah.
Do you do things with Steubenville?
We haven't,
Oh.
yeah, because they're not technically in the Diocese of Cleveland. That's how we kind of focus, and they have a lot of,
They're young stuff.
yeah, we have a lot of really great TOB teachers there. So, we see us like just trying to meet the need wherever TOB teachers need us.
Where did you get your degree
Biomedical sciences. So I majored in biomedical sciences. I was pre-med for like years and years. And then 4 months before I'm about to graduate college and take the MCAT and go to medical school, I say, hey mom, hey dad, guess what? Instead, I'm gonna be a missionary. Isn't that awesome?
I'm sure they were happy.
Oh yeah, they came around, but yeah, it was not a fun conversation. So yeah, I'm minored in philosophy and theology, and then I received a lot of formation at St. Mary's Catholic Center in Texas, which is actually the biggest Catholic center in the United States. Sorry, Steubenville, we got you there. Because it's just a huge school. And then when I was a culture project missionary, I received a lot of formation in theology of the body. And so it was the culture project in particular that set me up to be able to teach a lot of this.
Two things.
Yeah.
Your maturity is above and beyond.
Oh.
Not that some 24-year-olds are not mature, but yours is above and beyond.
Oh, thank you.
To relate, to be able to relate to all of us and for us to understand is awesome.
Mhm.
The other thing is you had mentioned how you got from, you didn't relate too much on how you got from Texas to here.
Yeah, so I decided that I'm not gonna go to medical school. It's January and February of 2022. I was in a position, a job where I was serving ministry, and I mean, the Lord just completely, like, he'd already captured my heart, but in a new way, just teaching and sharing the faith and walking with people. And I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. And so from there, I started just applying to jobs and different missionary organizations and got rejected and rejected and rejected, a lot of rejection. And I was like, Lord, what are you doing? Like, I trusted you, and here I am. Ended up graduating without a job. Don't have a job for 2 months. It was a really scary time of life, but ended up hearing about this thing called the Culture Project, and they do a lot of work with speaking into human dignity, sexual integrity, and they're based on theology of the body. They're also here in the diocese, in Pittsburgh, where I was, and so I was hired like August 2nd, and the Lord, you have to fundraise your salary as a missionary, which typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, and the Lord did it in 10 days for me, which was crazy. And so about 10 to 14 days after I was hired, I drove 26 hours from Texas to Long Island, New York, where I had training for about 2 months, and then was sent to Pittsburgh. Was in Pittsburgh for about 8 months as a missionary, and I really love Culture Project. Their approach is a little bit different from what we do at TOB Cleveland, and so just through some different experiences, discerned to leave. And once again, was like, awesome, what am I going to do? Now I have to apply to jobs again. And this position in Cleveland, Ohio opened up at Theology of the Body Cleveland. And there were just so many things, like conversations with Jen, my boss, and different friends who just really affirmed that the Lord wanted me to move to this city that I'd been to twice. So the first time I ever came to Cleveland, it was November of 22, I guess. And it was so cloudy. It was truly the coldest I've ever, like I was coming from Pittsburgh, but I was like, this is even cloudier and even colder. And I was like, oh my goodness, who would want to live here? And then 4 months later, I was hired. So yeah, that's how, yeah, totally cannot expect it. I'm also getting my master's in counseling right now. And so just some of the job was just absolutely perfect for my ability to be in school and work full time. So yeah, the Lord did provide for me. There's so many different stories of just him being so wonderful and leading me right where I'm supposed to be.
So how receptive do you find the students are to your teachings and what you're teaching them? Yeah.
Yeah, it depends a lot, you know, on the age and the setting. So Jen and I, our approach is that we typically, if we're going to teach TOB in a school or PSR, we'll do it in 3 to 5 days or sessions. And the first 3 days are just the kerygma. So we have 3 days to talk about the beauty of creation, the reality of brokenness in our world, the beauty of redemption and that we're made for heaven. And if we can do that right, then their hearts are a lot more open than you would think, because TOB just makes sense logically. And John Paul II, he's a phenomenologist, which means that as a philosopher, he really looks first at human experience. So our experiences of desire, of just being human, what's it like to be a human who wakes up every day and exists. And then from there, he bridges that gap with theology, with objective truth. And so a lot of kids I found resonate with that, especially when I speak on the fall and into like the reality of suffering, that and speak of Jesus as the answer to that, they do listen. Every day is different. Some days I've walked into a classroom and I've been like, okay, I totally won them over. This is awesome. And then I get back the next day and they're like blank faces. But I would say for the most part, 6th and 7th grade are really open. That being said, like these students, even if they're in Catholic private school, are very early exposed to a lot of really horrible things in our culture. And I think their own hearts recognize that they're not good. And so it's crazy when I speak about specifically pornography, like they don't know, but I can tell immediately like which kid, knows exactly what I'm talking about and might even choose to watch it because their face gets really red, but it's like, but also they're listening, so the fruit of it, I'm not sure, but they're surprisingly open. I just taught some 8th grade girls and I was really nervous because they were like really cool 8th grade girls. I'm like, gosh, I don't know if they're gonna like me. But then afterwards we're talking and they were like, yeah, like on TV, you just see a lot of people just hookup culture. And I'm just like, that's not real. Like, that's not good. I was like, yeah, girl, it's not. And so they do get it. And, the hope is that even if they in high school are like, whatever, that's lame, I'm going to do whatever I want. And when they're older, they'll remember the beauty of theology of the body, so I love hope. But overall, good receptivity, still hard, still a fight. So, yeah.
Well, God bless.
Yeah.
Kids, do you have any adult classes? I mean, because I think that what a kid first learns, they learn from their parents.
Mhm.
And it would probably be good if some of the adults
Yeah.
had the class.
Yeah, so our spring is very school heavy with middle schoolers and high schools, but especially in the fall, we do a lot of adult faith formation opportunities. So that'll either look like us coming into a parish and giving a specific talk on, Jen does a really wonderful talk with Luke Brown, who's a counselor in the area, on how to talk to your kids about sex. It's really good. And then we also do book studies. So we've partnered with the diocese, the Office of Marriage, Family and Ministry, to kind of share some of this. So in the fall, we'll be doing a new book study at hopefully 5 different locations throughout the diocese with the office. And it's going to be on a topic related to TOB or sexuality or how to talk to your kids and relate to your family in these places. And then we also just do different book studies throughout the area. So St. Basil is where our offices are. We're good friends with Father Ryan there. And so at St. Basil, we do a book study all the time. We actually just finished up Theology of the Body for Beginners there. So our website is tobcle.org. And if you're interested in anything, all our opportunities will be up there. Right now, it's kind of looking bare because it's the spring, but fall, a lot of things will be coming up, different book studies and such.
See, the Lord brought out the sun for you.
I know, praise God. I love it when he does that.
He's telling you're doing a good job.
Oh,
I love her.
thank you, thank you.
Are you seeing a lot more kids struggling with their gender dysphoria?
So gender dysphoria as like the clinical condition, not personally. I think it's very common for young girls in particular to identify as either lesbian or bisexual. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But I take a very optimistic view towards all of that. Just in my experience, like they're just aching for love, right? And good news, the church is full of love, and so I have a lot of hope that all of those things will be resolved. And so the answer is yes, but also no. Like I think people are very much more open to that. But I don't think it's as high of a, it's not as scary as you would think. I've done that's what I'm trying to say essentially is that, yes, it's a real thing, but there is a lot of hope, I think, for those kids in particular, because it's not always something that they don't grow up, if you know what I mean. So.
Any other questions for Erin? Okay, well, I hope you were blessed, even in just a little tiny way, today, this morning. Thank you so much for coming. We already did close out the prayer.
Yeah.
So feel free to stick around, grab some more coffee and some donuts. Also, another shout out to Tom and his son TJ for, the donated coffee from Big Leaf. Again, Parishioner-owned roastery, in Chesterland. So please feel free to support them. They also had some fundraisers for, on a trip to Honduras. So if you've donated this week or in the past couple weeks, thank you for doing that, for that mission trip they have there.